This episode is brought to you by Cube Gallery. Cube Gallery is a progressive art space in Cebu, Philippines, providing network and exhibit opportunities for contemporary artists with whom they work closely with and promote beyond the local reach. This month at Cube Gallery, Celestial Ocean by Uzi Emperado. You can also check out a few episodes ago where we interviewed him. He's an illustrator and visual artist. Uzi, or as he's popularly known as Uzi Emperado, is back with his second solo exhibition with Cube Gallery titled Celestial Ocean. It'll run from December 12 to 31. Uzi explores his personal philosophy and life through his uninhibited surrealist depictions of the ocean and the cosmos on canvas. His beautifully strange subjects, the juxtaposition of disparate things, and the depiction of alienation are just a few of the ways in which he conjures the peculiarity and uncanniness of today's contextual reality. Cube Gallery is open from Tuesday to Sunday, 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. at their space in Crossroads, Banilad. For inquiries, you may call 0918-807-4175 or follow Cube Gallery on Facebook and Instagram at Cube Gallery PH. And on artsy.net/cube-gallery. Let's get to the show. Welcome to 032 Conversations, the podcast where we talk to creatives, see how they live, and how they do their work. I'm your host, Carlo Villarica. Let's get this AMA started. But first, a little coffee. So second of all, thank you to everyone who submitted questions. I find these AMAs kind of fun. In fact, the challenging thing about it is, I find the AMAs kind of fun. Sometimes I get questions where it forces me to look back and to think about the purpose of what we've been doing and that sort of thing. And that's one of the... And then this AMA is kind of similar. So again, thank you to everybody who submitted questions. If you have more questions and want us to address it in a future AMA, I think this is my fourth Ask Me Anything episode. So probably do more of these eventually. So if you want to send us a question in the future, feel free to email info@zerothreetwo.com. Many times I'll just email back, really. Or send us a question on social media. We're on Facebook at 032 in letters, or on Instagram and Twitter. That's 032 Cebu. And I don't know, sometimes when I'm doing these intros, I feel like I'm rushing it sometimes. I don't know if I should be more chilled out. So I'm going to try to chill out a little bit so I can ruminate a little more on these questions and just see how it goes, see how this thing flows. You know, I feel like that's one of the things with doing the podcast, and doing the interview is fun because you get to bounce off another person and you get to bounce off their ideas. But doing it alone in a room where there's somebody doing construction work beside. I don't know if you can hear that. But anyway, doing it alone, there's I don't know. It's a different vibe, and I'm not sure I'm really into it. But it gives me, I need some time to get going, you know? So I'm just going to try to relax a little bit, maybe get another sip of this coffee. Oh, speaking of, if you haven't yet checked, check out the online shop in 032.com, assembly.032.com. We've got new 032 mugs, enamel mugs there. They're pretty cool. They don't break easily. You can bring them to like a backpacking trip. And they have the 032 script written over them. And if you order anything from 032, or if you order any 032 merchandise from the Assembly online, that's assembly.032.com, you get 20% off. Just use the promo code CONVERSATIONS. Again, just use the promo code CONVERSATIONS. That's with an S. You get 20% off. Yeah, that's what I'm using right now. Drinking this coffee. And yeah, so let's get to that first question. The first question is from @the_Baymax. Hi, I want to ask about your bike and trails. Me and two of my work friends want to experience Cebu on a bike, and we're still having second thoughts on places or trails to go on riding. Thanks. So earlier in the year, the wife and the kid, the family and we were all based in Mandaue. And the nice thing about Mandaue is that it's cool because there's a lot of roads and trails there. They all connect. So one favorite of mine. So wait, okay. First of all, I like doing these long rides, right? But you don't really get to do that. Some weekends I don't get to do that. Sometimes we just don't have the time, or sometimes the family has something like my rides. When I consider long rides, are like 4 or 5 hour rides, and sometimes I just don't have the time to do it. But for quick rides, I like to do it like during the weekdays. Like if I have an hour here, just to sweat it out, keep the fitness in, and try not to get the holiday weight on. So at least I'm always trying to sweat it out, trying to do something. But anyway, so some of the roads and trails that are near Cebu that I like going to, especially when I lived in Mandaue. I like going to that Pulangbato area. And in the Pulangbato area, it's cool because you have a bunch of hills that are just there. You can go to Guba, right? I'm going to link all these places in the show notes. I'm going to look for like a Strava link to them or something. But anyway, there's Guba. And you got Arcilla. So Guba is this nice long climb on the bike. The roads are cemented but not great, and it's nice and shaded. Most of the places are nice and shaded. So there's Guba, there's Arcilla. Arcilla is currently being paved, but there are big sections of dirt road there. So if you want to go off road a little bit, which is my preferred thing to do, I'd like to go off road for little bits and pieces of the time. Oh, not like super off-road. Like there's like super off-road where it's like mountain bike territory if I'm running a gravel bike. So Arcilla is good. And then there's another one right beside Arcilla that I always forget the name. Let me check on Google Maps. And then they all lead to basically the same place. You get to the top of that hill and then you can go to Sirao if you want a longer ride. And then from Sirao, you can connect to Ayala Heights. And from Ayala Heights, you can go down Trans Central. So it's nice. I like it there. Let's see. So you have Guba, you have Arcilla, and then this other road. Yeah, so the other road is called Cambiyoos. It connects closer to Sirao. So that they're all right next to each other. It's Guba, and then Arcilla, and then Cambiyoos. And then if you want to just kind of circle back and go through this like really hard climb, you can go up to Budlaan from there as well. And then that all connects to Budlaan, also connects to Trans Central. Or you can take a short, or if you just want to go back to the Mandaue area, you can come out. There's a road there that comes out to Sunny Hills. So in the Mandaue area, those are my preferred something close to Cebu. So those are my preferred routes. And then currently, since I'm here in the Lahug area right now, the problem with the Lahug area is that there just aren't as many choices, right? So, of course, the most common place that people cycle is they go up Trans Central from JY to Marco Polo. And then Marco Polo, they go up to this. There's a store up there near Chateau de Busay called Willy's, and that's where a lot of cyclists hang out. And then from Willy's, you can bike all the way up to Buak. So that's near right before the left turn towards Tops. So that's another route. But I don't generally like going up there because there's just too many cars. and it's just not as enjoyable. So, and also, if you end a lot of the long rides pass there anyway, so I'll tend to not do that, given a choice. So now that I'm currently in Lahog, I'm gonna go back to Mandaue hopefully next year. But now that I'm in Lahog, if I need a really quick ride, I'll go to Kalunasan. So basically, you can start, let's say, in JY, go through Opera, and then from there you can make your way up to the CPDRC. Did you see that Netflix show, Happy Jail? That's the CPDRC. And then from there you can go down to behind. If you just keep following the road, you'll end up behind Guadalupe Church. And then there's a Kalunasan loop there that I like. It's just basically a loop, and then you can start in the Guadalupe Church, and then you just loop it, and then you'll end back in the Guadalupe Church. And it's quite short. You can do it in an hour and a half. If I have more time, then I make my way down to Labangon. So behind Labangon, there's this place called Buhisan. So you can climb there, and then from Buhisan you keep going up, and then it'll reach Pamutan. So that's that's another favorite of mine, honestly. If I have more time and I just want to exercise ride, then I'll go there. It's super nice. It's covered with trees the whole way. So even if it's blazing hot, you're under the shade, and it's really I really like it there. I've talked to so I didn't discover. I mean, I found out about that place after talking to my friend Terence Go. He's a trail runner and ultra marathoner, and then they do a lot of trail runs up there in Pamutan. Him along with Meux Cordova, and so they there's a lot of trail running up there in Pamutan. I think they have it. It's called the Pamutan Trailfest if you're into running or trail running. And so that's really nice over there. And then once you get up to Pamutan, there's a road that connects basically to the Guadalupe Church again. And then that's a nice little loop. And now take note, everything that I've mentioned, all of the roads that I've mentioned here, they're all climbing. You all have to. In riding a bike in Cebu, if you get out of the city, the reality is it's a lot of climbing. You're going up a lot of hills, and Cebu is known for that. In fact, I find it difficult. So sometimes I'll do chill rides on Sundays, and then just flat rides. If I'm with my sister or my cousins, and then they don't really ride, they just want to go out on a bicycle and just chill out. And I find it difficult sometimes to find roads that don't have too many cars that are flat. I think there's a lot in Liloan. Unfortunately, I'm not from there, so I'm not as familiar. But there's so our go-to area is just go from Cebu City to Liloan. We'll go to that Liloan watchtower. What was it? Was it lighthouse? Lighthouse? Yeah, the thing that shines light on boats. Yeah, lighthouse, and that's usually a nice ride. And then if you have more endurance, you can go further up north to Danao. That's another nice ride that I like to do. If you have even more, you can go to Katmon. If you do Cebu City to Katmon and back, that's already 100 kilometers. So, but you're going quite far from the city. You're not near the city anymore. So, those are all rides that I personally like to do. Okay, let's go to the next question. So, this is a question from. This is a question from Intentional Posts. Dream interview, dead or alive, one in Cebu and one in PH. Keep up the great work. Thank you, Intentional Posts. I've answered a version of this question in a previous AMA. I'm going to link to it in the show notes. But I'll answer this one too in kind of a different way. So dream interview, for me, if you're talking about a dream interview in Cebu, it's basically whoever I have next in the calendar. So every interview is exciting in a way. In fact, I have a level of anxiety when it comes to interviews. I'm always a little anxious and always a little excited right before doing an interview. Doesn't matter who it is. It's probably a bad sign if I'm too relaxed, really. So everyone is asked to be on the podcast for a reason. I don't just choose guests to have a guest. I don't just interview anybody. So every guest that I ask on the podcast, they're on the podcast for a reason. So, which I'll get to. But so dream interview, the ones in Cebu, it's usually whoever is next. I'm usually excited for whoever is next on the list. Currently, no one is next on the list. It's December, so I'm taking a bit of a break. I've already interviewed a few people for January, so they're going to be coming out. And December is going to be, we're going to relax a little bit, little break. So, dream interview for somebody in the PH. Okay, so in the whole Philippines, this is where it gets tricky. So some people think of the podcast as a Cebu podcast, but the truth is, it's a Cebu podcast mostly because I'm in Cebu. So it just so happens to be that's where I am. Fortunately, there's plenty of interesting people here in Cebu, but there's also a lot of interesting people all over the Philippines, and I would love to interview them. I've just been resistant to it because I'm not sure if I'd do a good job on a Skype interview. I don't know if it would be any good. There's a certain connection when there's a person right in front of you. No? So you can see how they're reacting. There's a lot of, they say like most of communication is not actually the words, it's the nonverbal stuff. And I don't know. I've been going back and forth with it. I don't really want to do a Skype thing. I might have to eventually, but I've been going back and forth with it. A lot of the podcasts that I enjoy, podcasters like Tim Ferriss, for example, most of his interviews are remote interviews, and I think they're still helpful. But I don't know. I'm not sure if I'll go that route. Okay, so going back, dream interview of the one in the PH, for somebody in the Philippines. Honestly, that is hard to answer for me. I can't really think of a dream interview. I can think of a ton of people who I would like to interview, but no one is, a quote unquote dream interview. This is true also for the Cebu one. Honestly, like no one really stands out. Like I would love to interview Gabby Alipe from Urban Dub. A lot of entrepreneurs, for example, Steve, owner of Bose. Well, he's here in Cebu. That should happen. Who else? There's a ton of people that I'm currently blanking on right now. But I don't know. I think another thing is also I'm not really like into the artista culture. I don't really know a lot of what most people would consider famous people. So I don't know. It's another one of the disadvantages of not really speaking Tagalog, for example, because I just never got into it. But no one really stands out. I mean, those are the two that stood out, that just came out of my mind just right now. So maybe that can be the answer for this one. Hopefully, I'll have them in the podcast soon. Maybe 2020. All right, next question. It's from Stacy. Hey, Carlo, just want to send my regards. Love the stuff that you put out in 032. I was wondering if you have a list of podcasts recommended by 032. If you don't, that's something I'd love to read about. I'm on mobile, so I'm a bit lazy to search this right now. That's all. Keep up the good work. Thank you, Stacy. I do have a post about this. I'll link to it in the show notes, but you can just Google No Radio, No Problem, 10 podcasts that deserve your attention. It's published in rogue.ph. So this was written for rogue.ph, and that was a couple of years ago now. And there's a bunch of podcasts there, but there's some podcasts that aren't on the list, like Joe Rogan, Conan, Freakonomics, the Gary Vaynerchuk podcast, Malcolm Gladwell's Revisionist History, Seth Godin's Akimbo, the Longform podcast. I also recently started listening to the Outside podcast, something like it's an outdoorsy thing. Anyway, I don't want to get into I don't want to have to explain each and every podcast, but I've also been trying to look for some local podcasts to get into. So everything I mentioned, I'm going to link in the show notes. And because recently, I don't know, this past year or so, there's been a lot of local podcasts that have been popping up. And every now and then, I'll listen to it. So sometimes I'll listen to a podcast by Julian. He has a podcast called The Creator Life Pod. And, sometimes he has guests that I've been thinking about, so I'll listen to it. It's pretty okay. It's pretty good. And another one that I also really enjoy is podcast Historias. I wish Alfeca would do more of them. In fact, so last year she did a podcast with Quartz Cortez, and then I listened to it, and after listening to it, I really wanted to interview Quartz Cortez, and he was so he was a historian. He's a bassist also, but he was a historian. We talked about Cebu and its history. So far, it's been one of the most downloaded episodes, especially considering it just didn't come out in my most downloaded episode. It came out December 2018, and so far I think it's been one of the most downloaded episodes of all time. So that was good. The nice thing with Alfeca is there's a lot of production in her podcast. So I enjoyed listening to it. I wish she does more. Hoping to see more of these podcasts up, especially the local ones, on the interwebs. Okay, next question. This is from Yen Evangelista. How do you come up with podcast topics? How do you come up with guests? So topics really depends on the guests. Some guests want to talk about something specific. So the best example would be Happy Garahe. So when I met with Mark Deutsch of Happy Garahe, I had this whole, as with all of my guests, I have like an outline, a set of questions that more or less, this is what I want to ask them. And when I got to Mark's studio, I noticed there were these bond papers on the floor. And turns out he kind of storyboarded. Is that the word? I don't know. He kind of laid out literally on the floor more or less what he wanted to talk about. And then, of course, there was a lot of leeway, asked a lot of questions and everything. But it was, in a way, so he orchestrated that interview in many ways, right? But also, most guests, they just sit down and most guests sit down and just wait for the questions, and whatever I ask them is what I ask them. And so I come up with the questions or the topics really based on what I know of the guest, what I'm curious about. So or something or something they're known for. But I've found that the best podcasts, the ones that I think about after the fact, they're the ones that jump around in topics organically. There's a lot of back and forth. Ideas are talked about a lot. So a lot of it depends on me and how. A lot of it depends on how open the guests are to having a conversation as opposed to an interview. So I can tell sometimes when a guest is nervous. They just sit there and you ask them a question and then they'll answer. You ask them another question and then they'll answer. Somebody that comes to mind who was very comfortable, the opposite of that was Paulo Varela. So, in fact, he was so comfortable that one of my biggest interview mistakes was with him. So he was so comfortable that he sat down and then we just started talking. And then we started talking for about 40 minutes to an hour. And then I realized I didn't press record yet. And then I tell him that in the podcast. You'll hear that in the podcast. I didn't press record. So we talked about it. So that one was cool. There was a lot of back and forth with him. So since the topics depend on the guest, the next question is, how do I choose guests, right? So for me, the most important thing when I choose a guest is that am I personally curious about them? There's a lot of interesting people that I just don't know about, or I'm just not curious about, or they do something that I'm just I would have a hard time connecting with. So generally, I don't get to ask them into the podcast because it's just hard to have that connection. But if there's something that I personally want to learn from them, then I'll ask them in for the podcast. So guests who are doing something creative or athletic or anything that aligns with my personal interests generally get asked. Now, more and more, I'm trying to broaden my interests so that I can have a wider spectrum of guests. This is true for a lot of my guests in art, for example, because I'm not an artist. I appreciate it, but that's not my forte. But but these are conversations that I really enjoy. A lot of the conversations with the artists, I really do enjoy them. So to recap, how do I come up with topics and guests? Number one, the topic, really, a lot of it depends on the guests, and I have to be curious about the guests. I want to have to learn something from them, and if they align with something I'm currently interested in, they're likely to be asked as a guest. Okay. Next question is from Atlisa Pinko. What pushed you to do podcasts? So, let's get a sip of coffee first. So, a few years ago, I don't know, this must have been 5 years ago, more than 5 years ago now, maybe 7 or 8 years ago. I was doing a lot of driving, and then I was getting bored in my car. I was spending hours in my car. I was tired of listening to the same music over and over again, and I never really listened to the radio because they ended up playing the same music over and over again. So I was looking for something different to listen to while I was stuck in traffic. Sometimes I'd be in traffic for 3 hours a day. I don't know how I discovered it, but I realized somewhere along the way that there was a thing called podcasts. I think the first podcast I really listened to was a Radiolab podcast. Yeah, you should check them out. I don't think I listed them on my podcast to listen to, but you should check out Radiolab. Super good. But when I first listened to Radiolab, it was on a computer. I'd turn my computer on, and then I'd be doing something, and then I press play, and then the computer, it'd be playing. And then that's not really the ideal way to listen to a podcast. You want to listen to a podcast, on your phone, really, while you're doing something boring, like driving. So So when I started relooking at podcasts again, I just opened up, just looked for a podcast app, looked at the famous podcasts there, and just downloaded a bunch. And one podcast that came to mind was The Nerdist. So The Nerdist is it's really like a conversation podcast. It's with Chris Hardwick. I have since stopped listening to them, but I don't know if he still does it. I'm not sure if he used to do a lot, like 4 a week or something. Then he started dwindling down. He that Nerdist network became like huge, but so I guess he had less time to do podcasts. But a lot of what I do stems from the Nerdist as well, because you'd hear the fun thing about the Nerdist was you'd hear the guest get into the room, and then get to the mic, and at some point, like 5-10 minutes later, they'll be like, "Oh, did we start already?" So I wanted to get that casual feel into the podcast. But anyway, so that's how I discovered podcasts. Basically, I was just bored from traffic, and that's how I discovered it. So, and I didn't really know who was doing it, so I just kept listening to podcasts. And somewhere along the line, I discovered a friend of mine who was making podcasts of his own. His name is John Amor. I've yet to have John into the podcast because he lives in Davao. Anyway, he's a comic book artist, and he has a podcast about like comics, like nerdy comic book stuff. And I would listen to it. I just never got into it because I'm not really into comic books. I'm not updated on those things. But I asked him about it, and I'd ask him how he did it, all sorts of things, and it didn't seem difficult. You just put a bunch of people in a room and turn on a microphone. So if you fast forward to 2018, there were a couple of things in my work life that cleared up, and all of a sudden I had a little more time to do something else. And podcasts came to mind. So, but I still had a few apprehensions, which eventually became the criteria of whether I would continue to do it, because I decided in the beginning of 2018 that I would commit to 6 episodes, and I would do more if, number one, if it was fun to do. So was it something I would happily do for free, basically. Turns out having one-on-one conversations with people, with interesting people, is a fun thing to do. And number 2, were people listening? And if you are listening right now, you are proof that people are listening. So number 3, is there a possible future in doing podcasts? Was this something that could benefit me somehow, whether it be monetarily, whether it be getting connections, a wider network, whether it be just having a deeper relationship with another human being? So the podcast checks all of those boxes. So eventually, that's what pushed me. That's why I started doing a podcast. But ultimately, why I continue doing the podcast is that it makes me, it's fun, it makes me happy. People seem to listen, and there's a possibility of it becoming something. We don't know yet. We'll see what it is. Yeah. And another thing I realized about doing podcasts, of course, is that I learned a lot. I learned a lot from so many of these guests. And yeah, I guess that's it. That's what pushed me to do a podcast. That's the end of this Ask Me Anything episode. If you enjoyed it, let me know. If you want to hear more Ask Me Anything episodes, all you need to do is send me questions, and we'll see how that goes. The music from this podcast is Piano March by Audionautics. If this is your first time to listen to a podcast of 032 Conversations, consider subscribing. We have a new episode every Tuesday. We're on Spotify or any app that has podcasts. Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, whatever. yeah, I think that's it. One more episode, I think, before the year ends, and it's gonna be 2020. Next year is gonna be good. I hope you guys have a good one. See ya. Bye.